The woman hammering on my door at 6 a.m. was certainly not there to sell baked goods. She brandished a phone with 911 pre-dialed, shouting that my wife was a criminal trespasser for taking up residence in our own home. I stood there in my bathrobe, coffee cups steaming in the chilly morning air, looking at this red-faced woman who was visibly trembling with fury because my wife had the nerve to park her Honda in our driveway for the night. This HOA president, whom we'll call Brenda, was insisting that the police take Elena into custody for the supposed crime of living where she belonged. Her shrill cries bounced off the frost-dusted pavement as neighbors peered out from behind their curtains at the early morning disturbance. The thing about neighborhood tyrants, though, is that they invariably choose the wrong person to antagonize. 20 minutes after Brenda placed that 911 call, she would be holding entirely different legal documents bearing her own name, eviction papers. Allow me to explain how we arrived at this absurd situation. I am Marcus, age 45, and I work as an industrial maintenance supervisor. I'm the type of person who settles his bills ahead of schedule, maintains an immaculate lawn, and stays out of other people's affairs. 3 years prior, I purchased this house in Willowbrook Commons for $295,000. It's a respectable middle-class area with a homeowners association that assesses a monthly fee of $180 for landscaping and pool services. It's not luxurious, but it is clean and peaceful. 6 months ago, I married Elena, a 38-year-old pediatric ICU nurse whose profession is saving children's lives. This past weekend was slated for her official move-in. On Saturday morning, as she was unloading boxes from her Honda Civic, trouble appeared in the form of a woman in a pantsuit holding a clipboard. This was Brenda Kensington, 58 years old, who had been the HOA president for 4 consecutive years. She was the sort of individual who would measure grass with an actual ruler, a retiree from the county assessor's office with an excess of time and a deficiency of purpose. She resided in the largest corner lot, with flower beds so immaculate they appeared artificial. Not 20 minutes after Elena had parked in our driveway, Brenda was marching over as if she were responding to a major emergency. "Excuse me," Brenda declared, her pen held like a dagger. "We have violations for overnight parking here." She glared at Elena's Honda as though it were a rundown shack on wheels. "Multiple vehicles per household must be approved by the board, and that commercial equipment is a violation of our residential-only bylaws." The commercial equipment was Elena's medical bag, with her stethoscope and blood pressure cuff visible through the back window, the instruments she employs to help children breathe at the hospital. Brenda, however, was already writing out a $150 fine, her manicured fingernails tapping against the clipboard like little hammers. I came outdoors holding our marriage license and the deed to the property, both of which clearly displayed Elena's name next to mine. "She's my wife, Brenda. She lives here now." The morning air was filled with the fragrance of fresh mulch from Brenda's obsessively tended garden beds as I struggled to maintain a level tone. Brenda gave the documents a cursory glance. "It doesn't matter. Rules are rules." She affixed the fine to Elena's windshield with the air of someone who had just subjugated a small nation. Some people believe the rules don't apply to them. It was then that I saw the look on Elena's face, hurt and bewildered, as if she had been physically struck. This woman was treating my wife like an intruder for simply existing in her own residence. Elena was holding a box of nursing textbooks, still wearing her hospital ID from the previous day's shift saving premature infants, and this clipboard-wielding despot was making her feel like an outsider in her own driveway. However, Brenda wasn't finished. "I will be lodging a formal complaint with county code enforcement regarding this boarding house arrangement," she proclaimed loudly, ensuring the neighbors could hear. "And I have serious concerns about all this suspicious medical equipment." Her tone implied Elena was operating a drug lab rather than transporting the very tools that restart children's hearts. The sound of Brenda's heels clicking on the concrete reverberated through the quiet morning as she marched back to her stronghold, leaving Elena standing there with her box, looking as if she wished she could vanish. 3 neighbors were observing from their windows, their curtains snapping shut the moment I glanced their way. That evening, Elena sat at our kitchen table, still in her scrubs after a 12-hour shift in the pediatric ICU. "Maybe we should just pay the fine," she said softly, her voice heavy with fatigue. "I don't want to make problems." This amazing woman, who battles death daily to save the children of others, was concerned about causing trouble because some power-obsessed retiree had concluded she didn't belong. I reached over the table and held her hand. Her fingers carried the faint scent of hospital disinfectant, the aroma of someone who spends her days mending the world. "We are not paying that fine," I told her, "and we are certainly not going to let her force us out of our own home." As I lay in bed that night, listening to the faint drone of distant traffic, I came to a resolution. Brenda Kensington had just initiated a conflict with the wrong family. 3 days after that, a knock came at the door while I was having my morning coffee. This time, it wasn't Brenda. It was a man in a county uniform with an official clipboard, its metal edge shining in the morning light. "Code enforcement," he stated, looking apologetic. "We received a complaint about an illegal boarding house operation at this location." I let him in and showed him our completely ordinary home. 2 bedrooms, 1 married couple, and no boarders. He jotted down some notes, posed a few questions, and then shook his head. "Someone filed a complaint alleging you're running an unlicensed medical facility." He looked at Elena's small work bag near the door, which still carried the familiar smell of hospital antiseptic. "That's your wife's nursing gear, correct?" When I affirmed, he sighed. "Whoever reported this wasted everybody's time. You folks have a good day." Brenda, however, was only beginning her campaign. That afternoon, Elena returned from her shift looking as if she had been dealt a physical blow. "Someone called the hospital," she informed me, her voice just a whisper. "They alleged I was using hospital property for unauthorized activities and raised questions about my professional conduct. The hospital administration found it laughable. Elena is one of their top nurses, but the reality that someone had attempted to undermine her career made my hands tremble with anger." Then, the unsigned notes began to show up. On Tuesday morning, a folded piece of paper was beneath our windshield wiper. "Keep our neighborhood family-friendly." On Wednesday, another was placed in our mailbox. "Some people don't belong here." The messages were printed in capital letters, resembling a ransom note, but I knew the pricey cream-colored paper from Brenda's official HOA letters. The breaking point came on Thursday. Elena went out to her car and froze. Someone had carved a long scratch down the passenger's side. The raw metal shone through the blue paint like a vicious scar. She just stood there gazing at the vandalism, her shoulders slumped in defeat, and something inside of me fractured. That night, I did what I should have done initially. I thoroughly read our HOA bylaws. All 47 pages of mind-numbing legal text were spread out on my kitchen table, accompanied by a highlighter and my mounting fury. My father had always advised me, "Son, when someone is playing games with the rules, you need to know the rules better than they do." It turned out Dad was correct, because Brenda had been playing quite loosely with those very regulations. The first violation was her fence. The bylaws specified a maximum height of 6 feet. Brenda's backyard fence stood at 6 feet 8 inches. I verified it with a tape measure, just as she had taught me, the cold metal a reminder of her clicking clipboard. The second violation was that magnificent deck addition she was so proud of. There was no permit on file with the HOA, and improvements exceeding $5,000 necessitate board approval. Her deck had cost a minimum of $15,000, judging by the composite materials I could see. The most useful discovery, however, was something else, a detail I recalled from a property law course I took years ago when I was considering a career in real estate. HOA enforcement is required to be consistent and equitable. It is not permissible to selectively enforce regulations against certain individuals while disregarding the violations of others. It was stated right there in black and white, likely drafted by an attorney who understood precisely how petty despots function. The same rules that empower them can also shield you, provided you know how to wield them. On Friday morning, I submitted official complaints against Brenda to the HOA board. I enclosed photographs of her fence violation, proof of her unpermitted deck, and a detailed chronology of her harassment campaign targeting Elena. I also referenced the consistent enforcement clause and called for an emergency board meeting to deal with these grave infractions. The emergency board meeting took place on Monday evening in the community center. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed like agitated wasps as Brenda entered with her 3 allies, likely anticipating she would easily pass some motion against us. Instead, she entered a room where I was seated calmly with a folder filled with evidence and a smile that probably appeared a bit too self-assured. Before we discuss any supposed violations concerning my family, I stated as the meeting began, I would like to address some genuine violations that demand immediate action. I slid copies of my documents across the table to every board member, the papers making a gratifying rustle against the faux wood surface. As you'll see, we have some significant consistency problems with enforcement in this community. Brenda's complexion shifted through various hues as the board members looked over the photos of her fence and deck. "This is absurd," she sputtered. "Marcus is simply attempting to deflect from his own infractions by lodging frivolous complaints. Are you suggesting the tape measure is inaccurate?" I inquired, keeping my voice steady. "Or that the county building permits office is mistaken about your deck addition?" The room was filled with the uneasy silence of people realizing their HOA president had been caught in the act. The other board members, who were decent individuals merely wanting to maintain a pleasant neighborhood, began to ask Brenda some very direct questions about when she intended to rectify her own violations. Brenda's face was now the color of a ripe tomato as she understood her power move had backfired dramatically. "This meeting has concluded," she announced, snatching her papers and heading for the door. "I am not required to endure this harassment." "Actually," I called out after her, "according to the bylaws, meetings can only be concluded by a majority vote." She froze in the doorway, her body stiff with rage, then rushed out to the parking lot, where I heard her car door slam with enough force to shake windows. I had mistakenly believed that humiliating Brenda at the board meeting would cause her to retreat. I had seriously misjudged the rage of a woman who had just been publicly shamed in front of her neighbors. The following morning, on my way to work, I saw an unfamiliar car parked on the opposite side of the street. A man in a cheap suit was seated at the wheel, holding a camera. The morning sun glinted off his telephoto lens like the eye of a predator. Elena phoned me during my lunch break, her voice strained with worry. "There's a man taking pictures of our house," she whispered. "I saw him from the bedroom window when I returned from my shift." The coffee in my mouth suddenly tasted acrid as I grasped that Brenda had hired a private investigator to look into us, likely in the hopes of discovering some dark secret to validate her harassment campaign. The irony was exquisite. She was paying someone to establish that we were the offenders while she was the one violating HOA regulations. Yet Brenda's campaign was far from over. On Wednesday afternoon, Elena's supervisor at the hospital summoned her to the office. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed like angry wasps. Someone had lodged a formal complaint alleging that Elena was mentally unstable and embroiled in neighborhood conflicts that were impacting her professional judgment. The supervisor, a no-nonsense woman who had worked with Elena for 3 years, actually laughed. "Whoever made this call obviously doesn't know you," she said to Elena. "But I am required to document it for HR." That night, the scent of Elena's lavender stress relief lotion filled our bedroom as she sat on the bed's edge, her shoulders slumped in exhaustion. "Perhaps we should just move," she said quietly, her voice barely registering over the distant traffic drone. "I can't endure someone attempting to ruin my career over parking spots." It was then I understood Brenda's strategy was not merely harassment. It was all-out warfare aimed at forcing us out of the neighborhood completely. A visit from the city planning office occurred on Thursday. It was another anonymous complaint, this time asserting that we were in violation of residential zoning laws by running a medical practice from our house. The inspector, a patient man who had clearly encountered this type of nonsense before, looked at Elena's work bag and shook his head. "Ma'am, unless you're conducting surgery in your living room, bringing medical equipment home from your job is not a zoning infraction." That night, I resolved to adopt a more intelligent strategy. I contacted a property management attorney I had found online, recalling something my father-in-law had mentioned at our wedding. He had faced a similar HOA ordeal years ago and discovered that documentation was paramount. The attorney, Sarah Martinez, was a specialist in HOA conflicts and had the weary voice of someone who had seen it all before. "Here is something most people are unaware of," she informed me, her voice crackling through my phone as I paced the kitchen. "When HOA enforcement becomes selective and harassing, it exposes the association to legal liability. I handled a case last year where hostile environment harassment laws were applied to a housing context. The principle is the same as for workplace protections. She recommended I begin recording every interaction, complete with timestamps and witnesses. advice that mirrored what Elena had learned in her nursing education about self-protection through meticulous records. But then she delivered the real bombshell. You might want to ask for copies of all HOA financial records from the last 3 years. They are the property of the members. Brenda cannot legally refuse access. And from what I've seen, people who abuse their authority often have something to conceal in the financial records. My construction foreman used to say, when someone won't let you peek under the hood, that's how you know the engine's shot. On Friday morning, I put in a formal request for records to the HOA board, asking for 3 years of budgets, expenses, and vendor contracts. It's a standard request that any member is entitled to make. But when Brenda received the email, she convened an emergency meeting to talk about shielding sensitive HOA data from harassment. This attempted cover-up was all the confirmation I needed. Brenda's abrupt concern for privacy regarding public records was more suspicious than week-old fish. Simultaneously, the private investigator kept up his watch, though his efforts to remain concealed were becoming careless. On Tuesday, he trailed Elena to the supermarket, his car's engine idling noisily in the parking lot. On Wednesday, he was parked outside the hospital as she left her shift, smoke from his cigarette drifting out of a slightly open window. By Thursday, Elena had had enough. She marched directly to his car, tapped on the window, and inquired if he wanted her autograph, given his apparent fascination with photographing her. The man's face turned as red as a traffic light as he sped off, likely realizing that trailing a pediatric nurse hardly screams criminal mastermind. The neighborhood watch meetings initiated by Brenda attracted a total of 4 attendees, herself included. Tom Martinez, my next-door neighbor of 15 years, attended and later informed me that the entire session consisted of Brenda complaining about us for an hour. Tom is a retired accountant with keen eyes and a keener wit. She devoted more time to discussing your wife's car than to actual neighborhood safety, he remarked, the disgust evident in his voice. This is where Brenda committed her most significant error. On Friday evening, she sent an email to all residents declaring an emergency assessment of $800 per household for enhanced security measures made necessary by recent incidents. The email explicitly noted costs related to protecting our community from disruptive elements and required payment within 30 days to avoid property liens. That night, my phone began ringing incessantly, the sound echoing through our house like a summons to dinner. Neighbors who had remained silent throughout the harassment were suddenly very keen to talk. It seems no one appreciates unexpected bills, particularly those that have the scent of retaliation. Brenda had just made the issue personal for everyone. Saturday morning dawned with that type of crisp fall air that inspires one to sip coffee on the porch and observe the world awaken. Instead, I was faced with Brenda pounding on my door at 6 a.m. as if she were executing a warrant, her phone already displaying the 911 screen, her finger poised over the call button like she was about to launch a nuclear strike. "There is an illegal trespasser in this residence," she shrieked, loud enough to rouse half the neighborhood. The morning frost crunched beneath her feet as she paced our front steps like a trapped animal, her exhalations forming irate plumes in the cold air. "I am contacting the police immediately unless this individual departs at once." She was gesturing at Elena, who stood behind me in her nursing scrubs, still wearing her hospital ID from the previous shift, looking as if she would rather be anywhere else in the world. Taking a deep breath, I tasted the frigid morning air infused with the faint aroma of Elena's coffee. "Brenda, this is my wife. She resides here. We have presented you with the marriage certificate and property deed." But attempting to reason with Brenda at this stage was akin to trying to persuade a tornado to alter its path. She was already set on a course of destruction. "I don't care what fraudulent documents you possess," she retorted, her voice ricocheting off the frost-covered sidewalk with the sharp report of cracking ice. "No one moves in without HOA approval, and I never gave approval for this person." The way she uttered "this person" caused my blood pressure to surge into a hazardous zone. Elena is not merely my wife. She is a pediatric nurse who devotes her life to saving children, and this woman was treating her as if she were a common lawbreaker. At that moment, Officer Rodriguez showed up, likely anticipating a domestic dispute call based on Brenda's frantic 911 report. He instead discovered 3 adults in a driveway engaged in the most absurd argument imaginable. I calmly presented him with our marriage certificate, property deed, and Elena's driver's license showing our address. The officer's demeanor changed from vigilant to exasperated as he understood he had been pulled into HOA drama on his Saturday morning. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said to Brenda, his patience wearing as thin as an old rug, "this is a civil issue, not a criminal one. These individuals have every right to be here." But Brenda intensified her demands, insisting that Elena be arrested for trespassing, her voice growing more shrill with every word until it resembled the sound of fingernails on a chalkboard. By this time, neighbors were coming out of their homes like groundhogs, attracted by the disturbance. Mrs. Patterson showed up on her porch in her bathrobe, shaking her head with disapproval. Tom Martinez came outside with his coffee mug, observing the scene with the weary look of someone watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. Even the Johnson children paused their bike riding to gaze at the frantic woman yelling at the police officer. "There has been no crime committed here," Rodriguez said with finality, his hand drifting toward his radio as if contemplating a call for backup against Brenda. "Not us. If you make another false report, ma'am, you could be charged yourself." The warning lingered in the morning air like smoke, but Brenda was too consumed by her rage to heed it. As the police car pulled away, I observed the faces of our neighbors. Most seemed embarrassed for us, giving us apologetic looks before retreating inside. A few remained, and I received sympathetic nods from Tom and Mrs. Patterson. But the harm was done. Brenda had just publicly shamed Elena before the entire neighborhood, transforming our mourning into a spectacle with Elena as the reluctant star. I dedicated that weekend to an in-depth examination of our HOA documents. The papers were laid out across our kitchen table like a forensic investigation. Elena assisted in organizing everything, her medical training proving valuable in creating a systematic record. The smell of fresh printer ink permeated our dining room as we copied and sorted 3 years of financial records, which Brenda was finally compelled to provide after the board overrode her objections. It was then that we discovered it, concealed within the ordinary expense reports like a hidden clue. Every landscaping contract for the preceding 2 years had been awarded to Kensington Gardens LLC, a firm that not only shared Brenda's last name, but also listed her husband as the registered agent. The payments amounted to $47,000 for emergency landscaping services that our neighborhood clearly never received. I recalled my uncle, who had spent 20 years in city contracting, often remarking during holiday gatherings, "Follow the money, nephew." When someone acts crazy about power, they're usually protecting their finances. There was no competitive bidding process and no board authorization for contracts exceeding $5,000, a direct violation of HOA bylaws. The company had no business license or insurance on file. It was simply Brenda issuing checks from the community's fund straight to her family's business for services that were either never rendered or were grossly inflated in price. The calculation was straightforward. Each household had been overcharged by approximately $400 annually to finance Brenda's personal landscaping enterprise. The truly damning discovery, however, was something Elena spotted that I had overlooked. The dates of the most significant payments perfectly corresponded with Brenda's most hostile enforcement actions against other residents. Each time someone questioned her authority, unexplained emergency landscaping invoices would materialize within a few weeks. This wasn't just corruption, it was retaliation financed by the very individuals she was targeting. On Sunday night, I telephoned attorney Martinez again. "You're going to want to see this," I informed her, the financial documents spread out before me like criminal evidence. "And you might want to free up your schedule." This matter just grew much more significant than HOA harassment. Elena squeezed my shoulder as I ended the call. Her touch still had that subtle scent of hospital antiseptic, a reminder that she had been saving lives while Brenda had been misappropriating funds. "What's the next step?" she inquired. "Now," I replied. "We are going to reveal to the neighborhood exactly who they've been paying for their protection." I was in Attorney Martinez's office on Monday morning, observing as she examined our evidence with the sharp focus of a surgeon studying X-rays. The scent of leather-bound legal volumes mixed with fresh coffee as she laid out the financial documents on her mahogany desk, her pen making notes in the margins as if she were unearthing a hidden treasure. "This is a classic case of self-dealing," she finally stated, leaning back in her chair and letting out a low whistle that reverberated off the wood-paneled walls. But it is even worse than I imagined. She retrieved a red folder from her filing cabinet, the metal drawer closing with a solid, satisfying thud. Most board members attempt to conceal their corruption. Brenda has been blatantly pilfering from your community in plain sight. She guided me through the legal implications, and I suddenly recalled my business law professor from community college 20 years prior, who explained that corporate directors owe a fiduciary duty to shareholders. When members of an HOA board give contracts to themselves or their relatives without proper disclosure, competitive bidding, and board authorization, they breach that same fundamental trust. This is not merely unethical. It constitutes criminal fraud, which nullifies any corporate protection they might have thought they had. Here is what makes this case particularly egregious, Martinez went on, the afternoon sun streaming through her office window and casting dancing shadows over the evidence. Your HOA bylaws mandate board approval for any expense over $5,000. Brenda sanctioned $47,000 in payments to her husband's firm without a single documented vote. That isn't an error, it's deliberate theft. Yet the definitive proof was not merely the financial aspect. It was the retaliatory pattern that Elena had identified. Martinez demonstrated how the largest payments to Kensington Gardens LLC aligned perfectly with residents' complaints against Brenda. Someone questioned her authority in March, and suddenly there was an $8,000 charge for emergency tree removal in April. A resident contested an HOA fine in August, and all at once there were $12,000 in urgent sprinkler system repairs in September, paid to. You guessed it. She has been financing her vendettas with community funds, Martinez clarified, her voice filled with the righteous indignation of someone who has witnessed too many bullies exploit their power. Each time someone challenged her, she penalized the entire neighborhood by taking more from the common fund. It is like a medieval monarch levying taxes on her subjects to finance the soldiers who keep them oppressed. The legal ramifications were staggering. Brenda was facing potential criminal charges for theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The HOA's insurance would not cover deliberate criminal conduct, which meant she would be personally responsible for every misappropriated dollar, plus interest and legal costs. But the most satisfying twist was this. The false police reports and harassment she had waged against Elena created further criminal liability for witness intimidation and filing false instruments. A conservative projection, Martinez said, her calculator clicking as she tallied the figures, is that she owes the community $31,000 in fraudulent payments, plus another $15,000 in interest and penalties. When you include legal fees and damages for the harassment, we're looking at a minimum of $50,000. Her house is valued at around $380,000, so we can certainly recover the funds through a property lien that could compel a sale. Our strategy began to take shape with perfect clarity. We would issue formal demand letters insisting on complete financial restitution and Brenda's immediate resignation. If she declined, we would move forward with criminal referrals to the district attorney and a civil lawsuit for damages. But the decisive blow would be presenting this evidence to the entire community at the upcoming HOA meeting. Public accountability is your ultimate weapon, Martinez advised, placing the documents in a briefcase that looked as if it had seen many courtroom wins. Brenda has been relying on resident indifference and lack of knowledge to hide her actions. Once everyone understands how much of their own money she has stolen, her reign will crumble overnight. As I walked to my car, with the afternoon sun on my face for what felt like the first time in weeks, I understood that we had just completely turned the tables. Brenda had assumed she was dealing with some troublemaker who didn't understand his place. Instead, she had been methodically compiling the evidence of her own offenses while targeting someone whose wife had taught him that bullies respond to only one language: consequences. On Tuesday night, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, charting our course of action like a general preparing for a major offensive. The aroma of Elena's homemade lasagna wafted from the oven, mingling with the acrid scent of fresh printer ink as I arranged 3 years of financial evidence into orderly stacks. Each pile was another piece of the case against Brenda. Yet, from my experience supervising maintenance teams, I knew that the most effective plans depend on having the right people in the right roles. and Brenda was about to find out she had been waging the wrong kind of war. My first call was to Tom Martinez, my retired accountant neighbor, who had been observing this situation with increasing disapproval. "I've been hoping someone would finally challenge her," he said when I detailed our findings, his voice filled with the contentment of someone who has at last found a puzzle worth his time. "Email me those financial records. I'll craft a presentation that even my 90-year-old mother could follow." Tom had dedicated 40 years to tracking money trails for the IRS. If anyone could make Brenda's fraud unmistakably clear to angry homeowners, it was him. Elena applied her healthcare background, organizing our evidence with the same methodical care she uses for tracking patient medications in the ICU. She developed a timeline that illustrated how Brenda's harassment intensified in tandem with the fraudulent payments, with each event color-coded and cross-referenced like a medical chart mapping the progression of symptoms. "In nursing, we refer to this as pattern recognition," she noted, her yellow highlighter squeaking against the paper. "Present the pattern, and the diagnosis becomes clear to all." Our first supporter from the media, local reporter Sarah Chun, arrived on Wednesday. She came to our house with a tape recorder and the keen expression of a hunting dog that has picked up a fresh trail. HOA corruption is on the rise across the state, she informed us over coffee, her pen flying across her notepad as if she were transcribing a message from justice itself. Readers love these David versus Goliath narratives, especially when they involve compelling financial fraud. Sarah's investigation brought to light details we had overlooked. Kensington Gardens LLC lacked a business license, insurance, and had no employees other than Brenda's husband, Frank, who was listed as both the owner and the only contractor. The company's bank statements revealed deposits that perfectly corresponded with HOA payments but showed almost no business-related expenditures, no equipment acquisitions, no material costs, no payroll taxes. It was a sham company created solely to divert community funds into the Kensington family's personal bank account, as conspicuous as a neon sign advertising theft. Detective Jim Walsh joined us at our dining room table on Thursday evening, his off-duty presence adding the seriousness of someone who has dealt with actual criminals. Walsh lived just 3 streets away and had observed Brenda's behavior with the bemused look of someone who recognizes a real threat when he sees one. "False police reports are generally misdemeanors," he clarified, looking over the timeline of Brenda's harassment campaign as the ice in his sweet tea clinked. "But when they are part of a systematic effort to intimidate witnesses to financial crimes, it elevates the situation to a felony. Your wife isn't just being harassed. She's being targeted to prevent the exposure of this fraud." Our logistical preparations grew more intense as the week progressed. Attorney Martinez prepared a cease and desist order that was as legally formidable as a death warrant, demanding that Brenda halt all harassment and start immediate financial restitution. We compiled formal complaints for the State Attorney General's office, the county prosecutor, and the State Insurance Commission, which oversees HOA activities. Each document fortified our position like layers of medieval armor, shielding us from any frantic legal countermove Brenda might try. The major breakthrough, however, occurred on Friday when Tom Martinez called, his voice crackling with an excitement like the static before a storm. "You have to see this," he said, showing up 20 minutes later with a laptop and the triumphant look of someone who had just cracked a murder case. His forensic accounting analysis showed that Brenda's thefts followed a predictable schedule. She took the most money during the months when HOA reserves were at their peak, timing her fraudulent activities to sidestep the automatic audits that are triggered when account balances fall below specific levels. "She's been manipulating the system like a professional card counter," Tom explained, his spreadsheet displaying payment cycles that aligned with seasonal assessments. Every spring, when the annual dues are collected, bam, a huge landscaping emergency. Every fall, when special assessments are paid, suddenly we require urgent sprinkler repairs that cost precisely what's available in the bank. The level of sophistication indicated this was no amateur effort. Brenda had been running a deliberate, calculated fraud operation disguised as community improvement, likely learning the loopholes during her time at the county assessor's office. Elena proposed that we should personally invite each household instead of depending on Brenda's official meeting announcements. "She'll attempt to undermine attendance," Elena noted, drawing on tactics from contentious quality improvement meetings at her hospital. But if neighbors get the information directly from us, curiosity will fill that room. We spent Saturday afternoon going from door to door, armed with copies of the most incriminating financial documents and Tom's simplified breakdown showing exactly how much each household had been overcharged. The reaction surpassed our greatest hopes. Mrs. Patterson welcomed us in for coffee that tasted like sweet success and shared that Brenda had tried to fine her $200 the previous year for having too many garden ornaments, 3 ceramic frogs her grandchildren had given her for Mother's Day. The Johnsons showed us a citation for their teenager's basketball hoop, which was deemed inappropriately visible from the street, as if teenagers playing basketball were a threat to property values. By Sunday night, we had confirmed that 28 of the 31 households would attend. Tom had prepared a PowerPoint presentation that would impress corporate executives. Sarah Chun had arranged for a photographer to be present at the meeting. Detective Walsh would be there in a personal capacity, but wearing his badge as a quiet signal that criminal acts have repercussions beyond HOA disputes. Standing in our kitchen, surrounded by evidence, allies, and a plan as solid as a bank vault, I understood we had created something far greater than just a quest for revenge. We had assembled an army. The first indication that Brenda felt the pressure mounting came on Monday morning. Elena discovered a business card placed under our windshield wiper, belonging to some low-cost lawyer from 2 towns over, advertising HOA defense services on faded paper that seemed to have been printed on a 2-decade-old machine. The card carried the faint smell of desperation and cigarette smoke, likely left there by Frank Kensington in the early morning darkness, like something out of a low-budget spy movie. But Brenda's genuine panic became apparent on Tuesday after a call from Tom Martinez, who was laughing like someone who had just seen a clown trip into a wedding cake. She tried to retain my former accounting firm to represent her, he said, his amusement bubbling up like champagne. She asked them to look into irregularities in HOA financial oversight and to prepare defenses against harassment by disgruntled residents. The partners, having already seen the evidence Tom provided, politely turned her down, recommending that Brenda might be better served by contacting a criminal defense attorney, ideally one who offered payment plans. On Wednesday evening, we were met with an act of vandalism that went beyond any acceptable boundary. Elena arrived home from her hospital shift to find our mailbox annihilated. It wasn't merely damaged, it was utterly destroyed, seemingly with a baseball bat. Metal pieces were strewn across our lawn like shrapnel. To make matters worse, someone had spray-painted "Liar" across our garage door in furious red letters that dripped down the white surface like bleeding accusations. Our security cameras recorded the entire event with the sharpness of a nature documentary capturing predatory behavior. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m., and although the individual wore dark clothes and a hood, their gait and build were a perfect match for Brenda. Even more damning, the person used our driveway to turn their car around, momentarily revealing a partial license plate that Elena's sharp eyes identified as belonging to Brenda's silver sedan. Detective Walsh examined the footage and shook his head like someone watching a suspect confess live on camera. Destroying mailboxes is a federal offense, he noted, the evening air carrying the scent of a neighbor's barbecue as we stood in our driveway assessing the damage. Combine that with vandalism, trespassing, and witness intimidation, and she's compiling quite a criminal record. My sergeant always said that criminals act foolishly when they're scared. It appears your HOA president is confirming that theory. He filed the report on the spot, pointing out that the vandalism took place just days before our planned community meeting, timing that strongly suggested deliberate witness intimidation. On Thursday, Brenda engaged in psychological warfare under the guise of community service. She handed out flyers to every home, asserting that certain residents were plotting to destroy our peaceful community with false accusations and frivolous lawsuits. The flyer, printed on the same costly cream-colored paper she used for official HOA matters, cautioned neighbors about troublemakers who aimed to dismantle all community standards and plunge our neighborhood into chaos. Reading it felt like watching someone excavate their own grave with a gilded shovel. The flyer backfired more spectacularly than a firework in a garage. Mrs. Patterson called it the most preposterous thing she had read since her grandson attempted to persuade her that professional wrestling was authentic. The Johnsons affixed their copy to their front window with a handwritten note that read, We support Marcus and Elena. By Friday afternoon, over half the neighborhood had overtly dismissed Brenda's propaganda. Some residents even marched their flyers directly to our door, rolling their eyes at Brenda's transparent desperation. However, Brenda had not concluded her terror campaign. Friday brought the most revolting escalation yet. Elena's workplace received another anonymous call, this time alleging that she had been mentally compromised by neighborhood stress and required evaluation for patient safety risks. The caller gave specific details about Elena's schedule and recommended that the hospital observe her interactions with pediatric patients. Using the safety of children as a weapon against a pediatric nurse is a line that decent people do not even know exists. Elena's supervisor, Dr. Rachel Morrison, called her immediately, her voice strained with the kind of fury that arises from seeing excellence attacked. "This is becoming absurd," she said. "Someone with intimate knowledge of your personal life is attempting to ruin your career. I am documenting this as workplace harassment and am getting hospital security involved." Dr. Morrison had worked with Elena for 3 years and knew her as one of the most skilled and compassionate nurses in the pediatric ICU. But the fact that someone would exploit child safety concerns to attack Elena made my hands tremble with rage. On Saturday morning, I found Frank Kensington stationed outside Elena's hospital, seemingly taking pictures of her license plate and noting her work hours like some cut-rate private eye. When Elena confronted him, he asserted he was investigating suspicious activity and protecting the community from unstable individuals. The hospital security staff removed him from the premises, but not before he made thinly veiled threats about consequences for people who don't know their place. The neighborhood's reaction to Brenda's escalating tactics was telling. Tom Martinez created a neighborhood group chat that soon included 26 households, all sharing their own experiences with Brenda's mistreatment and voicing support for our upcoming presentation. Sarah Chin spoke with several neighbors for her article, gathering quotes like, "It's high time someone stood up to her," and "We've been too scared to say anything for years." On Sunday night, Elena was at our kitchen table sorting through medical documents, not for patients, but to record the health effects of the stress from Brenda's harassment campaign. The papers rustling in her precise hands. "I've started having chronic headaches, my sleep is disrupted, and I'm experiencing anxiety symptoms," she explained, her voice carrying the clinical objectivity she uses when discussing difficult diagnoses. "My blood pressure is high, and I've lost 8 pounds due to stress. This isn't just harassment, it's causing real physical harm." As we readied ourselves for Monday's meeting, observing Brenda's desperation descend into criminal acts, one thing became abundantly clear. Tomorrow, the neighborhood bully would at last meet her match. Monday dawned with the sort of crisp fall air that fills one with a sense of possibility. But by 6:30 p.m., the community center parking lot was already electric with tension. Every parking spot was taken as neighbors showed up early, many holding copies of Brenda's absurd flyer and shaking their heads with disapproval. The aroma of fresh coffee blended with the scent of fallen leaves as Tom Martinez prepared his laptop, the projector screen glowing white like a fresh canvas awaiting the masterpiece of justice. Brenda made her fashionable entrance at 7:15, striding through the parking lot as if she owned it, which, in her view, she probably did. She had come with her own support. Frank trailed behind her, clutching a briefcase that likely held their budget lawyer's advice, while Dorothy Pratt and Bill Morrison followed, looking more uneasy with every step. The sound of Brenda's heels on the concrete reverberated through the evening air like a timer counting down to 0, each step drawing her nearer to her own downfall. Inside, the community center buzzed with the highest attendance for an HOA meeting in its history. 28 households were present. Sarah Chun was discreetly positioned with her camera. Detective Walsh sat in the back, his badge on display like a silent assurance of accountability. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed like agitated wasps as Brenda scanned the full room, her confident demeanor wavering for just a second as she understood she was entering an ambush set up as a Democratic meeting. "Before this evening's meeting gets underway," Brenda declared, attempting to wrest control of the situation with the frantic energy of someone trying to catch smoke, "I want to talk about the malicious rumors being spread by certain residents who appear intent on destroying our peaceful community." Her voice had that familiar tone of injured authority, but tonight it sounded more like a deflating balloon than a commanding voice. These false accusations are merely harassment intended to point of order. Tom Martinez cut in, rising with the composed authority of a man who had spent 4 decades exposing financial falsehoods for the IRS. According to HOA bylaws, the first item on the agenda must be the financial report. I think everyone here is extremely interested in examining our community's spending. A wave of assenting murmurs swept the room as Tom made his way to the front, holding a folder so thick it could stop a door and wearing the smug look of an accountant about to set some very crooked records straight. Brenda's face went through a series of remarkable color shifts as Tom started his presentation, like watching a malfunctioning traffic light. The projector screen displayed spreadsheets detailing $47,000 in payments to Kensington Gardens, LLC, each line item starkly highlighted in red, like evidence in a murder investigation. The room became quiet, save for the low drone of the projector and the sound of 30 people's jaws dropping with the force of falling anvils. "Holy shit," Jim Patterson whispered, seemingly forgetting his wife's rule about language in public. "She's been robbing us for years." Mrs. Patterson nudged him for the swear word, but nodded in vehement agreement, her ceramic frog-loving grandmotherly senses detecting betrayal from a great distance, like a bloodhound on a familiar trail. Brenda tried to perform damage control with the frantic energy of someone attempting to plug a dam with chewing gum and wishful thinking. "This is completely inappropriate," she shrieked, her voice reaching pitches that likely disturbed dogs 3 blocks away. "These are private HOA documents, and Marcus has no right to." "Actually," Detective Walsh interjected, rising slowly and letting his badge gleam under the fluorescent lights like a symbol of accountability. "When financial discrepancies point to potential criminal acts, these documents become evidence." His voice had the quiet force of someone who has arrested real criminals rather than harassing pediatric nurses who save children for a living. "Ma'am, you might want to consider your right to remain silent until you've spoken with legal counsel, preferably one who has passed the bar." The warning hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had already burned everything in its path. Elena rose to speak to the room, her voice firm despite all Brenda had subjected her to, possessing the same calm authority she uses when explaining life-or-death situations to anxious parents. "I want everyone to understand what this woman has done to my family," she started, and the room seemed to lean in, like flowers turning to the sun after a harsh winter. She detailed the harassment campaign systematically, the false police reports, the efforts to ruin her medical career, the stalking at the hospital where she works to keep premature infants alive. Each new detail struck like a hammer against Brenda's shattered credibility, the faces in the audience shifting from surprise to anger to the kind of resolve that fuels revolutions. "She telephoned my hospital and alleged I was mentally unstable," Elena went on, her professional demeanor unshaken, even as her words cut through the room's silence like precision instruments. "She attempted to use the safety of children as a weapon against someone whose very job is to save children's lives." The irony lingered in the air like a poisonous fume. Brenda had been terrorizing the one person who dedicates her days to keeping their grandchildren alive. The official votes were taken quickly and with definitive results, like a perfectly aligned row of falling dominoes. A motion to oust Brenda as HOA president, 27 in favor, 3 against. A motion to require full financial restitution, unanimous, except for Brenda's dwindling supporters. A motion to prohibit Kensington Gardens LLC from any future contracts was passed with the fervor of people who had just discovered they had been financing their own subjugation. As Brenda marched towards the door, her heels clicking on the floor like a retreating army, Tom Martinez dealt the final blow with surgical accuracy. "Oh, and Brenda, the lien papers will be delivered tomorrow morning. You might want to get a head start on packing." The door slammed shut behind her with the finality of justice served ice cold. The following morning dawned with a sharp clarity that made everything seem attainable. I was barely through my first cup of coffee when a familiar pounding came at our front door. Through the window, I could see Brenda advancing up our walkway as if she were leading an assault, holding a manila envelope to her chest like a shield, and wearing the expression of someone certain they were about to land a decisive blow. "Marcus!" she yelled through the door, her voice laced with that usual mix of hysteria and feigned authority. I have legal documents that will put an end to this campaign of harassment once and for all. The morning sun glinted off the frost on our lawn as neighbors started to come out of their houses, drawn by the disturbance like an audience assembling for the most captivating disaster in progress. I opened the door with a smile that was likely a bit too self-assured, still holding my steaming coffee mug as Elena joined me, just back from her night shift at the hospital, wearing scrubs that smelled faintly of antiseptic and success. "Good morning, Brenda," I said evenly, watching her face cycle through shades of red that would make a tomato envious. "What has brought you to our door this early?" "I am filing for an injunction to halt your defamatory campaign of harassment," she declared, brandishing the envelope like a standard in battle. "The meeting last night was simply a coordinated effort to ruin my reputation with falsehoods and concocted evidence." Her voice carried across the morning air, prompting Mrs. Patterson to peek out from behind her collection of ceramic frogs and Tom Martinez to step out of his garage with a cup of coffee and the look of someone settling in for some high-quality viewing. That's when I smiled and called over my shoulder, "Honey, could you bring out those papers we've been expecting to serve?" Elena vanished for a moment, then came back with a substantial legal envelope that seemed to emanate official power. The morning breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves and the sweet fragrance of justice as I took the documents from Elena's hands. "Brenda Kensington," I announced, loudly enough for the assembling crowd of neighbors to hear, "you are being served." I presented her with the envelope with the formality of giving an award, except this particular award came with a $50,000 bill and the possibility of criminal charges. Brenda's expression underwent several remarkable changes as she tore open the envelope, her hands trembling like autumn leaves in a strong wind. "What is this?" she sputtered, but her voice was missing its usual authoritative tone and sounded more like air escaping from a punctured tire. "It's a property lien for fraudulent financial transfers," Elena stated with the calm professionalism she uses when giving difficult news to concerned families, plus criminal referrals for theft, harassment, and filing false police reports. She paused for dramatic effect, allowing the words to penetrate like a cure for a very specific ailment. "You taught us that some people believe the rules don't apply to them." The irony was palpable in the morning air, like smoke from a ceremonial fire. Brenda, who had spent years menacing neighbors with clipboards and fines, was now holding legal documents that could cost her everything she had taken, plus interest. The hunter had become the hunted, and the entire neighborhood had a front-row view to see justice play out in real time. At that moment, the morning took an even more compelling turn. Detective Walsh's patrol car pulled into our driveway, with Sarah Chin's Honda right behind it, press credentials displayed on the windshield. Walsh emerged in his official uniform, wearing the content expression of someone who finally gets to arrest the neighborhood bully instead of responding to her bogus complaints. "Mrs. Kensington," Walsh stated, his voice carrying over the growing crowd with the authority of someone weary of handling baseless 911 calls. "You are under arrest for filing false police reports, criminal harassment, and destruction of federal property." The handcuffs glinted in the morning sun like jewelry made especially for criminals. As Walsh started reading the Miranda rights to a woman who had spent months trying to have my wife arrested for living in her own home, Sarah Chun documented it all with her camera, the flash lighting up faces across our neighborhood as residents realized they were seeing the end of Brenda's reign of terror. Tom Martinez actually began to applaud, a reaction that spread like a contagion until half the neighborhood was clapping for justice being served alongside their morning coffee. "This is harassment," Brenda yelled as Walsh led her to the patrol car, but her cries were hollow in front of witnesses who had seen 3 years of financial records proving exactly who the real harasser was. "You will all regret this. I will sue every one of you for defamation." "Ma'am," Walsh cut in gently, "you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you exercise it." The car door shut with the satisfying finality of a story concluding exactly as it should, silencing Brenda's ongoing protests behind government-issued steel and glass. As the police car pulled away, taking our former HOA president to her appointment with justice, I turned to the crowd of neighbors who had assembled to see this event. "This is what occurs when communities unite," I declared, Elena's hand finding mine as the morning sun warmed our faces. "Bullies only succeed when good people choose to be silent." Elena stepped forward, her voice filled with the same resolve she uses to advocate for children's lives every day. Now, let's transform this neighborhood into a place where everyone genuinely belongs. The applause that ensued sounded like freedom itself. 6 months have passed, and I am standing in our backyard observing Elena as she coordinates the first yearly Community Accountability Day event. The change is nothing less than astonishing. The aroma of barbecue smoke blends with the sound of children's laughter as neighbors who hardly exchanged words before Brenda's ousting now convene around picnic tables, trading stories, recipes, and the kind of authentic community connection that cannot be bought, but can, it seems, be stifled by tyranny. The legal matters were resolved quickly once the evidence became public. Brenda entered a guilty plea to lesser charges to avoid a trial, paying full restitution of $47,000, plus penalties and legal fees that pushed the total to just over $65,000. Her house was sold within 30 days of her arrest, the for sale sign standing as a testament to the repercussions of believing rules don't apply to you. Frank dissolved Kensington Gardens LLC and found employment with a reputable landscaping company 2 counties over, likely relieved to be out of the shadow of his wife's spectacular downfall. Elena got a formal apology from the hospital's administration for the harassment she faced, along with a commendation for her unwavering professional excellence under extreme personal duress. Dr. Morrison put her name forward for the State Nursing Association's Community Service Award, highlighting her composure under pressure and dedication to pediatric care, despite what the nomination letter tactfully described as unprecedented personal attacks from a mentally unstable neighbor. The reclaimed HOA funds opened up possibilities none of us had foreseen. The neighborhood decided to create the Elena Martinez Nursing Scholarship for students studying pediatric nursing, allocating $15,000 of the recovered funds to support future caregivers on a path similar to Elena's. An additional $20,000 was used to construct a playground that could compete with any in the local parks, featuring equipment designed for children with disabilities, a suggestion from Elena based on her work with young patients recovering from severe injuries. Tom Martinez was elected our new HOA president by a unanimous vote. His platform centered on complete transparency and a zero-tolerance policy for financial misconduct. His first official act was to institute monthly financial reports sent to every resident via email, complete with photos of finished projects and receipts for all expenses over $500. Trust, but verify, Tom declared at his first meeting, quoting Ronald Reagan. And in Brenda's case, we skipped the trust part and went straight to verification. The wider influence reached well beyond the limits of our neighborhood. Sarah Chin's investigative series on HOA corruption earned the State Journalism Association's Public Service Award and prompted similar inquiries in 3 other counties, which revealed millions in fraudulent payments and self-dealing schemes. Her subsequent articles were instrumental in passing state legislation that mandates annual independent audits for all HOA organizations with more than $50,000 in community funds, a regulation now informally dubbed the Brenda Prevention Act. Our experience served as a model for other communities facing similar struggles. Attorney Martinez now focuses on HOA corruption litigation, representing neighborhoods from suburban tracts to retirement villages where board members thought they could misappropriate funds without consequence. She has a framed copy of Tom's financial analysis in her office, calling it the most beautiful spreadsheet in legal history, and commands top fees for what she refers to as the Kensington treatment. The emotional recovery took more time than the legal one, but seeing Elena laugh with Mrs. Patterson while helping to set up a face-painting booth, I knew we had achieved something more precious than just justice. We had forged a true community from the remnants of one woman's attempted despotism. Elena's stress-induced health problems vanished entirely once the harassment ceased, her blood pressure stabilized, and her inherent happiness in helping people was fully reclaimed. Property values in Willowbrook Commons rose by 12% in 6 months, not due to Brenda's tyrannical rulemaking, but because news had spread about a neighborhood where people genuinely look out for one another. Young families now actively choose our area, attracted by the accounts of a community that confronts bullies and safeguards its most vulnerable. This evening, as children enjoy the swings paid for with recovered stolen funds while their parents enjoy grilled burgers, and trade stories about Brenda's various absurd citations. Detective Walsh visits in his civilian attire. "That was the best arrest I ever made," he says to Elena, taking a plate of her renowned potato salad. "We usually arrest people who harm communities. That time, I got to arrest the person who was the community's greatest problem." The setting sun threw long shadows across our neighborhood as families began to pack up their coolers and folding chairs, children exhausted from adventures on a playground funded by justice, and parents already planning the next month's block party. Elena squeezes my hand as we watch neighbors assisting each other with their belongings, the simple act of community collaboration feeling entirely natural. "Do you know what the best part is?" Elena asks, her voice filled with the satisfaction of someone whose belief in human goodness has been completely renewed. "What's that?" "Brenda was correct about one thing," she says, with a smile that could illuminate the darkest night. "Some people truly believe the rules don't apply to them. She just failed to recognize she was talking about herself." Going inside past our reconstructed mailbox, I can't help but smile at the irony. Brenda devoted years to forcing this neighborhood to fit her ideal of order and control. In doing so, she unintentionally fostered something far superior: a genuine community founded on mutual respect, transparency, and the revolutionary concept that everyone is entitled to feel secure in their own home.